Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So, as I alluded to at the end of my episode with Liz and Kat about libertarian feminism, and as I promised in my very last episode, the Weekly Roundup, this episode is going to be an interview with Matt Cameron, who is an actual, honest-to-God, practicing immigration lawyer out of East Boston. He does also teach and write. He is also the co-founder and co-chair of Golden Stairs Immigration, which is a nonprofit that he founded to help provide legal services to non-citizens who require legal representation but cannot necessarily afford to have adequate legal representation. So the reason why I wanted to talk to Matt is that a lot of times, especially on topics like immigration, we tend to talk to each other a lot, and we tend to talk to more policy wonkish kind of people, and there's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I felt like this would be a great opportunity for me to talk to somebody who is an actual practicing immigration lawyer, who does specialize in asylum cases, and who does also specialize in crimigation, which is a term I am totally stealing from him, hopefully with his permission. But it's one thing to talk to people for whom this is kind of an academic exercise, and it's another thing entirely to talk to somebody who actually toils in these mines and has to actually help people through the asylum process, has to help people who are either in the asylum process or have green cards, or are in the process of getting citizenship, and deal with cases that arise in those particular situations for those people where immigration law kind of mashes together with our criminal justice system in sometimes very ugly, ridiculous, horrible ways. And so I wanted to sit down with Matt and talk to him about a whole bunch of different stuff. That all included some more topical stuff. So here we go. This is my interview with Matt. I hope you guys enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it. And so here we go. Here's me and Matt talking about all of the immigration things. All right, so today I'm talking to Matt Cameron. He is a practicing immigration lawyer, and I was wanting to talk to Matt because I think that there is a certain hole that is missing right now, in where we kind of don't ever talk to the people that actually have to deal with our immigration laws and deal with people trying to seek asylum, trying to get citizenship, and all of the various pitfalls that come along with all of that. So, Matt, go ahead and kind of explain to people what it is that you do for a living.
Well, I stop deportations. That's the short version. But I help people all the way through the what we'd call, I guess, the legal asylum process, but also and the legal process, I should say, what people would think of with legal immigration. But I also do a lot of asylum work. I do a lot of what we call crimigration, which is where the criminal and immigration systems intersect, which is quite a lot right now. But I mean, really, the short version is I try to keep people here however we can.
Cool. So I think where I want to start with is kind of explaining to people the process of going, say, from being an asylum seeker to hopefully, preferably one day, being a full citizen. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I don't think people understand is the time frame involved with this. This is not just like going to the DMV and filling out a couple forms and then whoosh, you're a U.S. citizen.
Sure.
So let's start from back. Let's pretend like I am a woman coming here from El Salvador and I'm seeking asylum, and I do one day want to be a U.S. citizen.
Sure.
What kind of time frame would I be looking at?
That's a lot of my clients, and so it kind of depends. If you're here already, and obviously to claim asylum, you either have to be at our border or in the country. So we'll start with that. And the law requires, if you can do it properly, you have to do it within 1 year of coming here, which is a real problem, obviously, if you're educated maybe at a third grade level and you don't really know what the laws are, and you're just trying to stay out of trouble, right? If you just don't want anybody to be noticing that you're here, we have that problem to begin with. That I meet people who have good asylum claims who've been here for 3 or 4 or 5 years or more. Sometimes people end up claiming asylum when they're caught by the system, and that's perfectly fine too. but you're going to have to show that you're afraid to go back for reasons that the law recognizes. And that's where we run into real problems with a country like El Salvador, where, as you know, our foreign military, economic, social policies have completely gutted these countries, and we have very weak governments that aren't able to do anything to protect people from really serious problems, and have completely destroyed the social structures and everything else that would normally keep a society together. So especially if you're talking about women from El Salvador, I've worked with a lot of them, and we have real problems with women who have been abused very badly by gangs, have been threatened by gang members. There's a lot of forced sex trafficking and human trafficking going on, and they have no protection. They have nowhere else to go, and they come here. And the problem is, thanks to Jeff Sessions and thanks to a very, very bad decision from last year, if the violence that you're afraid of, if the persecution you're afraid of is just private, and between private actors, say your husband or a gang member in the community, then that no longer qualifies for asylum for the most part, and that's a big change, and that's been a real problem recently. So just as a starting point, we have to think about asylum isn't just being afraid to go back, but it's being afraid to go back for reasons the law can recognize, and you have to be facing persecution based on your race, religion, nationality, what we call membership in a particular social group, which is pretty broad, and we can work with that. But I think people would be very surprised to learn the things that don't qualify you for asylum, and where we're at right now with that. So I think that is something people should understand, because I think most people assume that if you have a good story and you can back it up, that you should be able to stay. And I have to tell a lot of people, and I have to hear judges tell people all the time, that I believe you, that you're very likely facing a death sentence if I deport you, but the law doesn't protect you, and I can't protect you. And that's a very hard thing to watch. So if you make it through that process, if we find that you're being persecuted for a reason that we're okay with, and remember, this is all super political. So, for example, Chinese women who are facing forced abortions, which is terrible, and obviously the state should never force anyone to have an abortion, but that's an automatic asylum claim. We're going to give you that. You're going to get asylum. But the same woman in the same situation who's being forced to have an asylum by her husband, forced to have an abortion by her husband, is not going to get asylum. So you can see the problem here. There's a lot of political favoritism, a lot of, I've always, this is a really sick joke, but I've always said if we really wanted to fix this problem, we just convert all of MS-13 to radical Islam, because then everybody would get asylum, right? Then they're fleeing something that we don't like. But right now it's just gang members.
Yeah, and I do think that is a problem that a lot of people have, as far as not only legally speaking, it is a problem with how we view asylum seekers, but it's also like, say somebody's coming here from Syria. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a cut and dried asylum case because it's somebody fleeing an actual war zone.
Maybe. We got to prove who you are, we got to prove why you fled. But it's much more likely than El Salvador, certainly.
Yeah, but it also kind of the not understanding that, okay, if you live in a country where it's de facto run by drug cartels, like, do you now consider that a war zone? Which, right. For me, I do, but obviously, legally speaking, right. It's a different set of parameters. And I think that is something that's getting lost a lot in this conversation, is when people are seeking asylum and they're doing their credible fears. Like, I do mm-hmm. think that fleeing gang violence, fleeing sexual violence should be something that is considered, and right now it's not, and that is a bit of a problem.
And it's all political, and it's all very much about what kinds of people we want here and what kinds of people we don't. And remember, we were handing out asylum to pretty much anybody who wanted it from Soviet Russia who was Christian, right? And again, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm giving these examples because they're out there, but I'm just saying that there should be a little more equity here, that, we like Christians, but we don't like Latinos who don't speak English, right? And that's sort of, even though, again, it's just very, very political how we think about how we hand out asylum. And that's something I think a lot of people that maybe is lost in this too, is they think, well, it's a clean-cut set of criteria, so it must be that easy, but it really is, it's very difficult. But, I've worked with people from all over the world, from Ugandan political dissidents to Salvadoran women like we're talking about, to people from Nepal and all kinds of other places that have faced every kind of persecution you can think of. And obviously, classical asylum, what people think of when they think of asylum is the government is persecuting you. And that does happen, unfortunately. And that's a lot of the cases. But there are lots of other reasons that you could legitimately be afraid to go back, where the government may or may not be involved, or where they simply can't do anything to protect you from really bad actors. So it's a little messy. Anyway, so just to move on with the process, let's just say you do have the good fortune of having a good lawyer and a good judge, and you get through it. A year after you gain asylee status, and you can remain in asylee status for the rest of your life if you want to. It's not a great idea, because you have the opportunity to get a green card after a year, and then you have the opportunity to apply for citizenship 4 years after that. And of course, to apply for citizenship, you have to learn English and pass a basic civics test, but you can stay in residency status for the rest of your life. So in that sense, if you clear that hurdle, asylum is one of the easier ways, actually, to do it legally. But you have to have been through some pretty bad stuff, so.
Yeah, and something to touch on that you had mentioned earlier, and this kind of goes to the second hurdle that exists for this, and that is that if you are somebody coming in from a foreign country, especially if you don't speak English, you're not familiar with our legal system, you're going to have to hire somebody to help you through this process. It's not going to be something that you can do by yourself.
Right.
And it is a process that is not free. It costs money, sometimes a lot of money.
Sometimes.
Even when you set aside paying a lawyer to help you through this system, which obviously you have to do. So what is, like, roughly, leaving aside lawyer fees, because obviously that fluctuates and you don't have to put your business out there like that.
Sure.
But what is, like, the cost associated with going through this process?
Well, I should say we do keep our fees as low as possible for asylum seekers, and I do also manage a nonprofit that does that stuff. I will say that. But I've heard of lawyer fees going as much as $10,000 or $15,000 for asylum cases, just because I feel like we shouldn't leave aside lawyer fees, because it is actually, it's a lot. And we're talking about sometimes, you have very, very well-educated people who do speak English who want to make sure they have the best chance, and you have a much better chance with an attorney. But the real cost is going to be because you can't work for 6 months, and that's something else to think about, is the law punishes you essentially for applying for asylum by denying you a work permit for 180 days. You can't even apply for a work permit until 180 days have passed. And only because of a massive class action last year do they finally have these things going. But it was taking 4 to 8 months to actually get the work permit once you're eligible to apply. So you could go a whole year in this country without being legally able to work. And of course people work anyway. That's the nature of, that's what happens and we're simultaneously telling them don't take benefits, don't lay around on the couch and do nothing, and don't work, right? So there's a horrible mixed message there. But that's just as a basic economic thing. Most asylees are not coming here, asylum seekers are not coming here with a lot of money in the bank. By definition, they usually left their countries as quickly as possible. They're refugees, they're trying to start over in a new place, and they have to work. And the Trump administration now is talking about extending that waiting period from 6 months to 12 months, potentially, just to accommodate for the fact that there's such a backlog, and they just don't want people, because again, they see it as incentivizing asylum seekers, right? And they think if they give you a work permit on day one when your asylum application is pending, that you're just going to abuse the system, and that it'll encourage people to come here. And it could be a magnet, but I also think it's really unfair to set up the system arbitrarily where you can't work for 6 months. Other than that, though, there's no filing fee to file for asylum, not yet. Trump has actually threatened that, and it would make us the only country in the world where you have to pay a filing fee. It's arguably illegal under international law, like a lot of things that we're doing right now. And and by the way, in January, I don't know if you caught this, but there was actually a proposal not just to have filing fees for asylum, but to only, this is true, this sounds like The Onion, but to only charge filing fees to children, not to adults. And that's just, it's so sick, just to deter children from applying. Like this 10-year-old's going to not apply because he has to pay $500 or whatever. It's just, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, there's so much of this that's just draconian to the point where it's like, dude, really?
Yeah.
Really? But especially going back to the work permit thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're setting up a system where people have to potentially come here illegally because the legal ways of doing it keep changing on what seems to be like a monthly basis if you follow these sorts of things. But then once you get here, you then have to work illegally because you can't work legally because
right.
So it's like you're setting up these people to be fucked with, basically.
Absolutely. You're driving them into the obviously to be exploited. That's we need this constant pool of undocumented labor to have this country operate the way it is right now, and that's everybody's well aware.
And it's
terrible.
Yeah, there's the potential exploitation on one hand, and then on the other hand, you have this year period where you have to dodge our criminal justice system because you're working illegally, because you have to make money, but at any given point in your workday, ICE could show up or local PD could show up and arrest you for working illegally, even though you would like to be working legally, you can't. And it's just like, this whole system is just like, what?
Well, worse yet, too, in my experience, it'll drive you, and if you're like a reasonable person who's trying to get ahead, you'll buy a social security number, you'll buy IDs, right? So then suddenly you've committed a crime that will keep you from getting residency in the future, and even if you win your asylum claim. And they know this too. It's just another way, like you said, just to keep fucking with people. That's what it's out there for.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I guess since we're already here, and since it's kind of your specialty anyway, the intersection of immigration law and criminal justice law, and how these two things always seem to come together a lot more lately now, especially with things like racial profiling and stuff like that. And I don't think enough people understand that if you're here applying for asylum, or you're trying to get a green card, or you're trying to become a citizen, if you get hemmed up on a felony, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going back and you can never apply for asylum again. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
Which I know everybody's response would be, well, don't commit a felony. Well, guess how many felonies the average person commits in a day?
Oh, totally. Federal crimes, of course. Probably 5 before breakfast.
Yeah, and those are people who are actually trying to obey the law.
Right. And I mean, and at this point, there's something, and the felonies you're talking about are called aggravated felonies in immigration law, the ones that are permanently barring you from coming back. And that's serious shit, obviously. You're talking about a lifetime exile. That's a huge deal. And we've broadened that category so much. There are now something like 43 different categories of aggravated felony. And the fun part is these are just broad federal categories that are trying to squeeze all of these different state crimes into these federal boxes, right? So you get some absolutely fucking bizarre results. And I can tell you there's a California case, a very famous recent case from the Board of Immigration Appeals. Just think this out for a minute. Just really think about this, where they said that attempted manslaughter is an aggravated felony, but manslaughter is not. So attempted manslaughter is an aggravated felony, and manslaughter is not under California law. That's how the federal government interpreted it. So, of course, the joke is if you're running somebody over, just back up and make sure you finish them off, right? Because as long as you actually kill the guy,
you're good.
It's so fucked up. I mean, we have these kinds of things all the time. The First Circuit Court of Appeals here in Boston calls it a multi-layered archaeological dig, and they've begged Congress to do something about this because we have been trying year upon year, just layer upon layer, trying to squeeze all of these state offenses into these federal boxes. And the worst part is, of course, since we continue to broaden these aggravated felony categories, as we all know, once the state does something like this and broadens these definitions, we're never going to come back and revisit this. We're never going to say, oh, maybe we went too far. Maybe we're deporting too many people or criminalizing too many people. That requires somebody to actually stand up and say that and say, well, actually, maybe certain categories of people who have taken other people's lives shouldn't be deported for life, right? That's a hard argument to make. Just in the same way that as we continue to expand ICE, it's going to be very hard to find people to stand up and say, maybe we shouldn't have 20,000 active ICE agents, because we've created this political flashpoint. But a lot of this is the intention is to criminalize these lives and to criminalize these people. And when I think most of us think of felonies as the big stuff, murder, rape, just serious drug trafficking, whatever. The stuff that the state has said for many years is felonies. The classical sort of like old English felonies would be arson, murder, rape, used to be sodomy, and burglary at night into a dwelling. Like all of those things were the really serious felonies. The ones that most people can agree are just the worst things you can do to other people. And federal immigration law started out that way. And now, as recently as 1990, it was basically child sex abuse, rape, murder, torture, and then, of course, serious drug trafficking, because you can't forget drug trafficking. That's obviously equivalent to child sex abuse. And we just kept broadening it, because that's what we do. And now it's a much, much longer list. But of course, nobody's going to stand up for the aggravated felons. So it's continuing. And there was a proposal some time ago that would have actually made unlawful presence a crime, which it is not, just to be totally clear. It is not a crime to be here without permission. A lot of people don't understand that. That's understandable, just the way the media reports it, but it is a civil offense. But Republicans were talking about actually making it a crime to be here and doing it in such a way that it would essentially be criminal trespass to be in the United States without permission. And then they were trying to find a way to twist that into making it an aggravated felony. So essentially, if you've been here without permission before, then you never get to come back, which is absurd. And that's just so far beyond what the original intent of this aggravated felony statute provision was, because obviously they were supposed to be differentiating the worst things, the things where you have no chance of return, the things where we permanently bar you. And, it's being taken beyond a perfectly good joke.
Yeah, it was a perfectly good joke at one point, and now it's just like,
yeah,
no, stop.
Yeah,
but it's something that, I mean, it sucks for people like you and me who are U.S. citizens who do have to live under this fucked up criminal justice system where we have made so many things aggravated felonies and felonies and federal offenses, and it's like, no, it sucks even worse for these people because the stakes are even higher for them than it is for us.
Yeah, and I just want to make this clear because, this is the problem that we've gotten into, is that we're making this real distinction between criminals and non-criminals, right? And Obama said we're going to deport felons, not families, which sounds great. I mean, that's a really good line. But if you're saying that a kid who stole 2 pairs of sunglasses from the mall is a felon, and not just a felon, but an aggravated felon, and that's a real case. That's a case I had a few years ago. He's an idiot. He was 20 years old. He's just shoplifting at the mall. But under the New Hampshire statute that he was convicted under, it ended up being an aggravated felony. And my closing argument to the judge was essentially, this fucking sucks. What are we going to do about this? And the judge had to agree that it fucking sucks. But what are you going to do? I mean, that's the law. He's convicted of something that was absolutely classified as an aggravated felony. There was no way around it. And it was probably about, I think, $35 worth of merchandise, right? So this is what happens when you start to criminalize people, and when you start to decide that some people are inherently bad because they've been convicted of crimes no matter what those crimes are. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and I think that's where the kind of like the slippery slope is coming in, because people think about like MS-13 or like all kinds of crazy stories that come out nowadays about how violent migrants are, and they're all a bunch of gang-banging, rapists, murderers that are coming here, hide your kids, hide your wife. But the vast majority of them are just people who want to come here, work, live their lives, have something better than what they were leaving behind. And even in a case like that, like, did he even know that, like, if he got caught shoplifting these sunglasses, that would pretty much be, like, the end of his U.S. journey?
No, and to be clear, that kid had a green card. I mean, that's the other thing people don't realize. I mean, this is somebody who was here legally, and that was it. And he doesn't get to come back. And yeah, there's no way that you'd be on notice of that.
That just sucks so bad.
Yeah, it does. He's back in Cape Verde. He's got nobody. That's how it goes. And I mean, obviously, I understand the position of, you're here in our country, follow our laws, whatever. But I mean, we all do stupid stuff, and it's also the fact that there's I'm sure this will not surprise you, but there's all kinds of white collar stuff you can get away with that won't get you deported, or you might have a waiver available for. But the social crimes, or God forbid you accidentally touch a police officer. I'm not even talking assault a police officer. I mean touch one. Any kinds of other things, that just a lot of stuff that I consider to be pretty minor that you can end up suffering really serious immigration consequences for, and you can embezzle for years from your employer and be fine, right? So I don't know. It's not supposed to make sense, I guess.
But especially on the topic of cops, I mean, now if you touch a cop, it's assaulting a cop, which, right. Okay, what you have like 5 weapons attached to you and I don't, so really, right. who's got the upper hand here? And
it's always slapped on, especially for poor people of color, it's always slapped on as a retaliatory thing when they even move, when they're being cuffed, right? Or resisting arrest, obviously we all know that one is just slapped on all the time. Even if you have muscle spasms, or if you're just uncomfortable in your cuffs, and they'll let the DA figure it out, they'll just put it on you.
Yeah, and that's something else that I kind of wanted to talk about because especially when the whole Black Lives Matter thing blew up, I mean, obviously drawing attention to racial profiling, to the fact that police do treat black people and brown people differently than they treat white people. I mean, it is what it is. The thing I was thinking about during that is that, okay, yes, this is an important conversation to have, but what about people who are here illegally and do get racially profiled and do get harassed by cops? Like, if this happens to black people who are U.S. citizens who do have some kind of recourse or recompense for if the police do beat you up or they do arrest you for some bullshit or something like that, how do you think they treat brown people or people of any color who they know are not here legally and know that there's like nothing these people can do to fight back? Because, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to take your illegal self over to the police department and complain about a cop? Like, yeah, like what?
No, that's a great point, and I've seen it again and again so many times. I mean, just here in Brockton, Mass, there was a really dirty cop that I was following for a while. I think he's finally gone. But this guy was like some stupid traffic cop, and he thought he was out there being Dirty Harry. I mean, he was kicking people to the curb and just beating people up. You know, I met multiple guys, and again, like I'm working with the Ecuadorian community down there, really hardworking construction workers, like a lot of really self-employed guys. And he just didn't like that they were making money, and they were making good money because they're working their asses off. And he'd pull them over and, give them some bullshit about how your ladder's extended too far off your truck or whatever. And there's one particular case where he pulls – I really liked this client. This guy was a badass. He pulls him over. He starts beating him up at the side of the curb. And, of course, my client – he didn't know this, but my client speaks perfect English. And my client says, "I make more than you do, asshole," as he's beating him up. It's perfect. Let me go home and show you my tax returns. And, of course, that just got him more of a beating. But, I mean, good for him. But I've seen this over and over again. And then, of course, there's ICE, which is a whole other issue. And, there's immigration enforcement for white people and immigration enforcement for everybody else. And I can tell you a whole another couple hours of stories about that. But, I mean, most recently I had a CBP report where literally, I'm not exaggerating here. It just said that he stopped the guy because he looked undocumented, right? And I really wanted to get the guy in the stand and ask him like what in his training experience told him that somebody looked undocumented, because it turns out the driver was a U.S. citizen. This person he thought looked undocumented, but my client was in the car and he wasn't, and so he ended up in proceedings. But that we actually got that one thrown out. It's actually very hard to get a case thrown out of immigration court the same way you would get something suppressed in criminal court, and it's a very high standard. But the judge agreed with us that it's really unfair to pull somebody over because they look undocumented. I mean, that's way too much.
Yeah, and I imagine stuff like that happens every day, and we don't hear about it because, like, who are they going to tell these stories to? Like, what are they going to do?
People who are trying to stay out of trouble, stay in the shadows are not, and they also figure, because you have to remember, a lot of these people are coming from countries where it's totally normal to have corrupt cops beat you up and yell at you and demand money from you or whatever. I mean, that's just part of life, right? So I don't think they're too surprised to come here and have the same thing happen, unfortunately.
That sucks.
Yeah, it really does.
Like, you're trying to come here because you think it's better, and then you get treated the same way you got treated back at home, and then you're just like, well, shit, this sucks.
Right, what am I doing?
Why did I come here again?
Yep. No, and just so many places where, because there's no advocacy. I mean, there's us obviously on the front lines doing what we're doing, and there are plenty of good advocacy groups, but there's no real advocacy group for a lot of these people in the same way that there is for other groups. For the reasons we're talking about, obviously, because people don't want to come out and publicly talk about these things.
Yeah, from here, I kind of want to shift to I'm just going to hard pivot because this is my podcast and I do what I want.
Do it.
I know you follow asylum law, and I'm sure you follow very closely what is going on the southern border and are forever changing rules and how asylum seekers are supposed to conduct themselves and where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do when they get there. And so much of what is going on right now at the border is a direct result of Trump making policies and not bothering to think through the actual ramifications of what happens when you change certain rules. And the one that I think everybody has forgotten about, and it's easy because news cycles just are what they are, and sometimes things that were like a month ago feel like they were a year ago. But especially like the situation in Tijuana, and to a lesser extent Juarez, because, well, Juarez is Juarez and nobody wants to go there. But everybody wants to talk about how there are these clusters of people in certain places, and it's like, well, let's stop and think about why there are clusters of people in certain places. And that's because Trump decided that everybody has to come through a port of entry instead of the old way of basically you could hop the border illegally, turn yourself into CPB, and it's a misdemeanor. But now you have to
nothing.
go. Yeah.
Or you don't get charged at all. You just get to do your case. No, totally. And that's I'm going to push back on you, though, because I actually think a lot of this is intentional. I think that, and I'm not saying Trump knows what he's doing, because he doesn't, but he's surrounded by people who do, and he's surrounded by some of the hardest right nativist people who have actually been waiting for their time. And, I can give you so many examples of places where I am sure, not to be too conspiracy minded here, but I'm absolutely sure that they're intentionally pushing policies that make life so much more miserable for people that they're going to be driven to cross the border illegally. They're going to be driven to do things they wouldn't do otherwise, and they're going to be able to get the examples they want. And we know, the far right did this in Hungary with the Syrian refugees. Maybe you saw some of these pictures, but they forced everybody to these choke points in very much the same kind of way, and then they stopped giving them any food or water or aid. So of course you got a bunch of people who are seeking asylum who have nothing, trapped in these choke points, unable to cross, unable to go anywhere. And of course riots break out, people break down fences, people run for it. And then you get this scary video of these scary migrants, right? And just today, I just saw today before we started talking that they're releasing this video of some Africans. Because this is, it does happen. People don't really think about this, but there are people coming from all over the world that end up at the southern border. They're mostly Latino. They're mostly from Central America. But we do meet people all the time from Cameroon, Angola, other places that are facing real persecution in their countries that end up in the Mexican border. And so they released this very scary video of, obviously scary if you're afraid of black people, but of all of these Africans crossing the Rio Grande. And somebody made this great point that maybe 11 people had been caught last year crossing because they were all waiting their turn and doing it the right way at the port of entry. But the wait has become so long now, 3, 4, 5 months or more. And you're talking about people who maybe don't speak any Spanish and aren't able to survive in Tijuana, have no means to do anything, and are essentially homeless. And they're being pushed across illegally. So, of course, you get people to the checkpoints, you push them to the brink, you force them to cross illegally, essentially, because they are legitimate asylum seekers and they're trying to get here one way or another, and they're not safe in Mexico. And then you get your video. And you get to show the world, look, this is why we need the wall. This is why we have to enforce this way. And I think it's pretty clever. I think they know what they're doing. A lot of this stuff, obviously, is just throwing spaghetti at the wall, but a lot of it is actually organized, and it's being thought out. I've been to Tijuana 3 times since December, and I've seen the desperation. I've seen what it's doing to people. I've seen the misery because all of those migrants are being targeted by the local cartels because they all stand out. And the cartels, unfortunately, assume that maybe they've got people back home who can send them something. It's amazing to think of cartels preying on asylum seekers, but they're doing it. It's not a safe place to wait, and that's what they're being forced to do.
Yeah, and even when I've done episodes trying to explain, like, how things work, even in, like, Tijuana and stuff, I try to tell people, I'm like, no, I'm not fucking kidding. Basically, you go to Tijuana, you put your name in a notebook, and somebody carries around this notebook, and they're guarded, and you go and they give it to, I forget who is making the decisions now, because I cannot, it's so hard to keep up with everything, but they open up the notebook and they read out like 10 names, and those are the people that get to come through the port of entry that day. And I'm like, this is the jankiest system of life, but this is what these people have to deal with.
And I've watched it for hours. I've stood there and watched them do it. And the really Kafkaesque thing about it is that it is asylum seekers themselves that are managing the notebook because they just needed some way to organize themselves. So you ended up with all kinds of weird stories and things happening. But officially the notebook doesn't exist, and officially none of this is happening because it's illegal. We're supposed to be allowing people to come up to the port of entry and apply. We're not supposed to be metering them, which is what we're doing. And, we have detention facilities that are sitting open with a lot of beds, but we're not taking these people. We're saying we can't. And it's all very intentional. Again, it's to cause a lot of what we're seeing, and to make this as difficult as possible. It's very much a full-on war on asylum. Like, there's a very coordinated policy shift, there's a very coordinated enforcement shift, and it's all being done in a very obvious sort of way if you're following all these things at once.
Yeah, I will grant you that point. That is a good point. I hadn't really thought about it like that. But another story that I saw come out a couple of days... No, it was Thursday, I think. Was it Thursday or yesterday? Anyway, I think it was BuzzFeed did a story about how these migrants, and they were specifically focusing on the ones over in Juarez, which that's... Nobody wants to be there. That's hell on earth, and that's why everybody ended up in Tijuana. But the original idea for the Remain in Mexico plan was that they would be there for 45 days, and now these people are getting court cases that aren't till January of next year.
And that's not even going to be your final date. You're going to have to keep going.
Yeah.
And you're waiting the whole time.
And so none of these people had planned financially to be in Juarez for that long. Like, they don't have the money to stay there. So it's like this another choke point that's being set up, and it touches on this idea that I have that, like, and like you said, it is kind of forcing people to do things illegally, but it's like, how can you expect somebody to do it legally and to follow a procedure if the procedure keeps changing? Like, all the time. It's like, it's a setup for failure.
Absolutely. Well, and just to get to I really want to make this point. I always want to mention this whenever I'm talking about these things. If you are U.S. citizen and your brother or sister is Mexican and you want to bring them to this country, there is a sibling visa that's available, but it's going to, at current rates right now, it's going to take 120 years at least. I think it's actually more like 140 years right now for that sibling visa to be available for them to actually use. So how can you say that's an immigration system, right? How can you say that's actually anything? It's a joke if it's going to take 120 years, obviously 2 human lifetimes maybe. I've been saying you might as well just buy a plot of land in the moon, because it's more likely that your brother's going to live on the moon than that he's going to be a U.S. citizen. And very much the same approach to the asylum system, that we're going to set up a bunch of arbitrary roadblocks, make this as hard as possible, and then blame you when you can't do anything or when you don't show up to your hearing. And the other thing, too, is that these people who are waiting in Mexico under this stupid plan are being given lists of lawyers in Texas across the border from Juarez. They're being given lists of lawyers in San Diego across the border from Tijuana. And none of those lawyers are going to take these cases. And again, that's just the very, very few lawyers who are working for services and agencies that are able to provide pro bono services. That's hardly any right now, because there's no funding available for most of this. But even if you are lucky enough to get a pro bono attorney, your attorney is in San Diego and you're in Tijuana, and it's another roadblock. It's just another way that it makes it that much harder, because by definition, I am not going to prepare an asylum case over the phone. I have to go and talk to you. We have to work this out. It's going to take a while to prepare everything. And, I don't want you sitting in an internet cafe somewhere yelling on Skype, like telling me the story of the worst thing that ever happened to you. And, in public, we have to go meet privately somewhere, but you can't come to my office, right? So just all of these little hurdles that people might not even think about because of this stupid plan.
Yeah, that was the first thing that struck me with the Remain in Mexico plan, was just the sheer logistics. I'm like, okay, if you're in the U.S. court system, you kind of got to be in the U.S. You can't really be in another country and be traveling back and forth to make court dates. So, like, logistically speaking, this is a stupid idea.
Oh, yeah.
But it's
designed to fail. It's not designed to win.
Yeah, I think it's designed to make people give up and just
Absolutely.
go either stay in Mexico or go somewhere else. And that's just, legally speaking, by U.S. and international law, that's not legal. That's not how you're supposed to do this. And I don't care how many executive orders you write or how many dumbass plans you come up with. Sure. You don't get to circumvent the law.
Well, they are doing everything they can, and federal judges keep shutting it down, but they just keep, popping up with new things. And yeah, no, it's I'll come back at another thought, but this whole thing. Oh, I was going to say, actually, what's going to happen, of course, when you can't cross the border, or when you have to go live somewhere else in Mexico completely because you can't be in Tijuana or Juarez, and you end up missing your date, or you end up not being able to get a lawyer and you can't complete your case. At the end of the day, the Trump administration is going to say, well, look at all these bullshit claims. These people had bogus asylum claims. They couldn't even bother to show up to court. Blame the victim. That's what it is every time with all of these things.
Yeah, that is another thing too, and it's just it's something that it's very hard for me to kind of wrap my head around, because I grew up in South Florida. I was born in '81, so I grew up with the Mariel boat lift people. Mm-hmm. Yep. And obviously, when I was growing up, wet foot, dry foot was still a thing, which, fuck you, Obama, thanks.
Sure.
But it's this idea that I don't think people who haven't spent time around asylum seekers, refugees, don't seem to understand that, like, once you make that decision to leave your country, you're doing it. Like, it's this idea that you've decided that whatever happens to you, whether you walk from the Northern Triangle or you get on some flotation device from Cuba, or however it is you decide to get to this country, you decided that whatever happens there is better than your life was. And so it's like this cognitive dissonance where when you don't understand that, then you don't understand why things like family separation isn't a deterrent, or why these sorts of roadblocks aren't a deterrent. It's like you don't understand. They've already made their decision. They're coming to America. However they have to do it is what they're going to do. So if you keep making it more and more illegal, well, I mean, it's not going to stop anything because the decision was already made.
And that's what's amazing to me isn't that the kind of person that we say we want? Is the kind of person who will do anything and persevere and work their asses off to be here, right? And those are the people we're turning away. It's just, again and again, the hypocrisy. I mean, there's no point. It's 2019. There's no point in fucking pointing out hypocrisy. Obviously, nobody cares. But it's all over this system. And it's hard to watch. It's interesting you mentioned Mariel, because I was just talking about that in my class last night. I teach an immigration policy class at Northeastern. And Mariel is such a fascinating example of so many things, because it's really the only example we have of just a huge mass of people. I think 125,000 people showing up in the course of a few months, really. Less than that. And it didn't destroy Miami. South Florida survived and did better than ever in the end. This is not a great group of people. You know, Castro is emptying the prisons in some cases and putting them on boats. People with really serious issues. And again, Castro was imprisoning a lot of people that shouldn't have been there, but this is not like an ideal population. And it certainly is not like the families we're seeing now who are coming from Central America. This was a very different population. And still, no net negative effect to South Florida, to Miami. If anything, the Mariel story is just really one of how much we shouldn't be afraid of these people.
Yeah, and if memory serves, I think it ended up being like 179,000 people over the span of like 4 months. Like, it was an insane amount of people. And I like to use that example to counteract the whole, well, we can't process this many people. It's like, yes, we can.
Yeah,
like, we've done it before. Like, yeah, absolutely. We can.
And we did. I mean, that's how the golden age of immigration, right? Like something like 1890 to 1910, when we had open borders. And right here in Boston, my office is in Boston Harbor, and I think about this a lot because they were watching the ships come in full of Irish and Italians and then coming back to Europe empty, right? And, you can imagine people in Boston getting more and more nervous because they're essentially at the border, right? They're experiencing the same thing that people in the South are talking about now. And that's considered to be the golden age, the best time that we had in immigration, and one of the strongest periods in American history, right? When we filled this country with immigrants, with open borders. And somehow now that idea is just so disgusting to so many people.
Yeah, and it's so wild, especially if you know anything about immigration history. The same arguments that were made against, like, people coming in through Boston, people coming in through Ellis Island, are the same exact arguments that people make today about people coming in from anywhere. Like, they're low skill, they're low IQ, they're dirty, they're disease carriers, they're going to be a drain on society.
Not learning English. Yeah. All the same stuff.
Not going to assimilate. They're just, Yeah,
no, it's we have this. So I live in East Boston, which is Boston's historic immigrant community. And it's really interesting because we have that multi-generational thing where we have a lot of people here who can remember their Irish and Italian grandparents and great-grandparents, even their parents. and they can remember them, coming home with their citizenship certificates and the stories of them getting off the boat and everything else. And of course, my Nana was a saint, and she cleaned the sidewalk every day, and she learned English the day she stepped off the boat, but you can go back and look at history and you see that's not true at all. And that's never been true. I mean, every new successive wave of first-generation immigrants, it takes a little while for people to assimilate, but they do. They learn English, they get jobs, they don't rely on public welfare. Generation after generation, no matter where they're from, that's the story. And that was the story with their grandparents and great-grandparents too. But now we're getting that kind of ladder pulling effect, right, where the people in our neighborhood who are of that ancestry are getting angry about the new immigrants coming from Central America, which is now the majority of our neighborhood, getting angry now at another wave of immigrants coming from the Middle East and Northern Africa, right? And again, just the same story playing out again and again, the same movie.
Yeah, and you could also make the point about whiteness and who was and was not white 100 years ago.
Absolutely.
Which is always amusing for me to see that people who literally weren't white 100 years ago when their families came here, all of a sudden now you're worried about not white people. It's like, guess what? Yeah. You weren't white when you got here either. You became white.
We still got the cult of the Kennedys, and of course, when the Kennedys first got here, they were not part of the political system. They were ostracized, just like every other Irish family, low-income Irish family, and they had to organize through the bars because they didn't have any other social way to get together, and they brought their vote together, and there was an Irish vote suddenly. That's how it's worked. But we romanticize all this now.
Yeah, and it's just it's weird when you know immigration history to watch this all unfold again. And it's like, we already went through this once before and everything turned out okay. Like, it was fine. Like, this is how we became America. Like, it's okay, people. It's going to be all right. More
than once, and pretty much every generation. I mean, you can find some strain like this. This is particularly virulent, and it's particularly hard to watch, but we've always had these kinds of reactionary things.
Yeah, and it's history repeating itself over and over again. It's like, okay. But before we leave off, I guess since we're already here and talking about dumbass border ideas, I guess we should discuss the latest dumbass border idea. The tariffs? No. Did you really have to mash together all the things I hate into one policy? Like, did you have to do this?
We were just wondering today if maybe he's just actively trying to not get reelected. Like, he really hates it this much that he's going to make everybody pay 25% more for everything by October. We're paying for it, but I that's the wall he's building. He's building a wall between us and avocados. It's just, or car parts or whatever else it is. I'm sure I'm not even thinking of everything that we actually get from Mexico. But he can't build a wall, so this is what he does. I cannot believe that people are allowing this to continue, that he still has a base after proposing something like that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how long that's going to last, because especially with it being against Mexico and being the time frame that is set up is just absolutely ludicrous. Like, you want Mexico to solve a problem that has existed for decades in 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay, dude. Like, no.
Right.
But
they're not even Mexican citizens, right? And that's, of course, his base doesn't know that, and they think everybody south of the border is Mexican. But it's just, I don't understand. I really would sincerely like to have somebody explain this to me, because I don't understand it.
Yeah, like, first of all, why would it be Mexico's responsibility to handle this for us?
Right.
Like, can somebody please explain that to me? Like, if Canada said to the U.S., you know what, there's too many of these people coming to our border, so do something about that for us. We'd be like, fuck you. Go totally. Handle your own shit.
Well, what I like to say is, it's like, if I burned your house down, right, which is basically what we've done to Central America.
Yeah.
If I fucked with you that much, I think morally I have a responsibility to give you room in my house until we can do something about your housing situation, right? That's a reasonable compromise, because I burned your house down. But now we're saying, we got all these people that are coming through the neighbor's yard to get to our house because we burned their house down, and we're blaming the neighbors. And it's just that's where it's at.
Yeah, and that's another. I always make that same argument too, is that to sit here and to try to other these people and to try to be like, well, why are they coming here? It's like, that's kind of our fault, guys. Like,
Absolutely.
we did that. That was our dumbass meddling back in the 80s and 90s. It's our dumbass war on drugs that's causing this situation. So
it was right up to Hillary Clinton backing a coup in Honduras in 2008. I mean, and beyond 2010.
Yeah, like this is kind of our fault. So I do think there is a moral imperative to let these people in from these countries that we kind of broke.
Yeah,
like we broke it.
Got to take responsibility. And I've always said that if Iraq or Afghanistan were in Central America, I think people might understand it at least a little better, because at least we remember those wars, right? But our memories are so short. And there was a program in the late 90s called NACARA that essentially gave amnesty to anybody that could prove that they came up here during the time of these civil wars that we paid for. And it was very much a direct sort of, sorry about what we did to your country, sorry your family was slaughtered and tortured in front of you, but have a green card, right? It was like that was the least we could do, literally, was to just immediately, instead of having you go through the asylum process, which by that point, by the way, we had shelved all the asylum applications for years, so they were stale, and the countries were basically at peace, so they would have lost all the asylum applications. We just gave them a green card, and I think it's time we did that again, because we owe these people such a debt generationally at this point. And I think it actually might be the best solution, both to the problem of undocumented people in the U.S. and to rebuilding these countries, is to continue to do what we can to help. And the solution is not throwing more money into those countries. There has to be something better.
Yeah, because I mean, throwing money into a corrupt country is like, well, great, you just wasted money.
Yeah.
Like, what did you think was going to happen?
Yep, you got to give to the people.
Yeah, and kind of to touch back on the tariff situation, assuming that these tariffs are going to go into place, which I do because I don't really see a legal mechanism for making that not happen.
Oh, also we live in hell, I should point out, so it's going to happen.
Well, yes, that too. People are about to find out just how much food we get from Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is really going to be kind of the big fuck up, because tariffs on stuff from China, especially the things that we are tariffing from China, is kind of more like raw material sort of stuff, or things that you don't necessarily buy on a daily or weekly basis. Food you buy on a weekly basis. Like when the price of food starts going through the roof, and not just everybody makes fun of avocados, and obviously, but so much of our produce comes through Mexico. Yeah. Which obviously that's going to be the cost of buying produce in and of itself. The cost of prepared food that involves that produce is going to go through the roof. Like, there's so many consumer goods that come through Mexico. It's like, this one, I think, is going to hurt people on a much more fundamental level than the China tariffs do. So I'm very interested to see exactly how this is going to play out, especially with Trump's base, especially with his base that is more rural or more lower income, because that is who this is really going to hurt.
Yeah, it's terrible. I can't wait to hear how it's Nancy Pelosi's fault. Somehow. Yeah. It's going to be, or somebody's. It's not going to be his fault. And of course, on the other end of that, we're deporting the agricultural laborers in our country who are from Mexico and Central America, who are actually growing our food. We're making it much harder for them to live here. So, I mean, it's just squeezing it from both ends. Plus all our restaurant workers, service workers everywhere. We're having the hardest time filling some of these jobs. And certainly, you've heard the stories about places like Georgia and Alabama that have these very strict anti-immigrant laws where the fields are just laying fallow. They can't grow anything anymore in some places where they can't get labor. These are just economically and politically suicidal moves. And I don't know. I don't know what to say about it.
Yeah, and especially the immigration bill that was supposed to come out this week, I thought, at some point, but instead we got tariffs. Yeah. we were supposed to get legislation, instead we got tariffs. That's the Trump administration in a nutshell. And
the judge last week saying that they can't divert DOD money to the wall. The wall right now is going to be pretty much functionally dead as he promised it. So let's just pay more for stuff.
Yeah, that was like the same thing. That was the first thing I thought when they said that you're just going to divert money from the DOD. I'm like, you can't do that. Like, that's not how this works. You can't just take money from the DOD and fund a wall. Like, money is not fungible like that. But I was going to make a point, and now I forgot what it was. Damn it.
That's all right.
Oh, it'll come back to me. But I think, yeah, because we talked about the tariffs, which are just stupid and dumb and is going to hurt people very, very badly. Mm-hmm. And yeah, especially that's what it was. There it is. Low-skilled workers versus high-skilled workers. And his dumb, non-existent immigration bill that is supposed to prioritize high-skilled workers over low-skilled workers, which is like, that's not actually what we need right now. Like, we've got the high-skilled workers. And the thing that I can never understand when people make this argument, and again, this is one of those real, like, cognitive dissonant things. If you're going to make the argument that low-skilled immigrants cannibalize U.S. jobs, but then you want to say that high-skilled immigrants are A-okay, it's like, okay, so they don't cannibalize jobs? Like, they're not coming here? Like, and the difference between, like, I mean, low-skilled labor, there is a floor for how much you can pay people. Whether you're doing it above board, you're using minimum wage. If you're doing it under the table, then you can kind of do whatever you want. But I mean, there is a floor that's not going to fluctuate all that much. Like, if you wanted to pay an illegal immigrant, say, $7 versus paying them minimum wage, like, okay, that's going to save a company a little bit of money, but it's not going to be the same as bringing in somebody on a work visa and paying them $40,000 a year versus hiring a native and paying them $60,000 a year. Like,
totally.
Like, it's a huge difference, and I don't understand why the emphasis on high-skilled workers versus low-skilled workers. It's like, what difference does it make?
Well, it's okay. There's some really interesting stuff to unpack here, because I mean, it's obviously racial and it's obviously class, right? There's a lot of, like, you know, because Trump said the quiet part loud, obviously, when he said that we need more people from Norway, which of course is an atheist socialist country, versus people from El Salvador who tend to be deeply religious and capitalist, right? Just kind of reverse of what you'd think you'd want our immigrants to be, but they're white, right? So we want more white people. But there's also, to me, okay, this whole thing with merit, right? Because the idea of merit-based immigration has been out there for a while. Obama was proposing it. In many ways, it's a good thing. It can be. But we're also in the position where the state is going to define who has merit, right? That's dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing when you're letting qualifications for merit be set by the government, especially this government. But think about this, because I've really been beating my head. As you said, there isn't really a plan. It's just a set of basically talking points from Jared Kushner. But let's just pretend that they're going somewhere with this. I was thinking about this a lot, because I know a lot of really hardworking Central American immigrants who have worked their asses off, starting at minimum wage, made their way up to supervisor at their cleaning company or whatever, and then they go off and they start their own company. They hire U.S. workers. They continue to work their asses off, all doing quote-unquote little skilled labor, right? They're cleaning houses, cleaning offices. They're cooking in kitchens, or they're starting their own restaurants. And so you're going to say that that guy doesn't have merit, but somebody who graduates with a computer science degree from Stanford and then goes to work for the NSA to design surveillance algorithms, he's got more merit than my cleaning guy? I mean, that's just how can you possibly say that what he's doing is of better value to society? That's what you're saying when you're talking about merit. You're saying that some people are inherently of more worth or more value to society than others. And it's disgusting when you actually break that down. It just really bothers me.
Yeah, and especially when you think about, like, okay, somebody can be low-skilled today. That does not necessarily mean they will be low-skilled in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years.
Sure.
So judging people where they're at today, like, okay, say you come from a country where you can't get that kind of education, or you don't have a specific skill set. That's not to say that you can't come here and get that education and skill set, which is another problem I have with the whole low-skilled thing. It's like, okay, well, we were all low-skilled once, and then we learned how to do things. Yeah,
it turns out people can educate themselves. But also, what if your aspiration is to start a cleaning company? Like, that's still considered to be low-skilled, right? But that's a valuable service. We need it. And it just really bothers me that that we're creating these arbitrary distinctions between people, and it's all to serve this purpose of saying, because they know it's 2019, they know we can't say that we can't go back to the system that we used to have, where we actually had racial and ethnic quotas, right? Where it was actually very explicitly that we're going to take so many people from India and so many people from the UK, and it just happens that our quota for the UK is, way more people than even want to come from the UK. We had that system until 1952. And even really until 1965, we had some form of country-based quotas. And we can't do that anymore, but the closest thing we can do is try to set these definitions of merit in such a way that they benefit wealthy white countries. And that's very intentional.
Yeah, and I think they try to get around the race quota thing a little bit with the diversity lottery, where you're picking people from certain countries that aren't represented. It's like, okay, well, it's very fascinating to see what countries you seem to think deserve to have more or less people in the diversity lottery. Like, I see you.
Yeah, well, Ireland has been in it for a long time, right? And
yeah.
It's very strange. Not that we don't like Irish people, but that's just really weird to say we don't have enough of them, right?
Yeah, and the Northern Triangle countries are a little underrepresented, shall we say?
Yeah, no, it's and then again, just to make the point too, the diversity lottery is only 50,000 visas a year out of 1 million that we give out, and Trump treats it like it's a major part of the system. I think he just doesn't like the word diversity, probably. But he's told all kinds of amazing lies about this. And remember, he is the CEO of the immigration system. He's in charge of it. And I've always thought it's like if Tim Cook comes out and starts talking about how much he hates the iPhone, right? The latest Apple product, and how bad it is. I mean, and doing it in a way that shows that he doesn't even understand what it is. And that's what we're working with here. Trump literally said that he thinks, or he said directly, that the way the diversity visa works is that countries put their worst people into a bin, and then they sort of draw them like it's Powerball, I guess.
Yeah.
But the guy actually holds in his sleeve like it's a bad poker game, like he holds the ones that he really wants. It's just like this whole nutty scenario, which has nothing to do with anything, because our State Department runs the visa lottery, and it's people who want to apply. And by the way, the visa lottery is actually the only place outside of employment visas where you have to have a minimum education requirement to clear it. People don't know that either.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you actually have to have 2 years of you have to at least have a high school degree, the equivalent of, or I think maybe even 2 years of something else. But there is actually an educational requirement, which there isn't for family visas, and obviously there is for most employment visas. But yeah.
Which, I mean, even the employment visa situation has gotten ridiculous under Trump, because they keep slashing it every year. And it's like, okay, you keep saying you want legal immigration, but you keep slashing the avenues for legal immigration. So do you really want immigration?
No. And I can tell you, inside the system that we do have, they're putting up what we call the invisible wall. We've got just all kinds of absolutely arbitrary bullshit that is clearly from the top, because I've never seen anything like this before. They're slowing these cases down. They're slow walking everything. They're giving us requests for evidence like we've never seen before. They're just making it very, very hard for people to get through this legal system, even through the avenues that might even be available to them, which are very few.
Yeah. It's just really ridiculous to watch, and it's not that it was much better under Obama, but at least it wasn't quite this ridiculous.
No.
But
it was bad, and certainly there was. Yeah. It wasn't what he said it was, and I can tell you that that most of the people who were being deported still didn't really have serious records. It was, and he was telling us it was just the worst of the worst, right? Or any record. The majority of people who ended up in deportation proceedings under Obama were stopped for traffic violations, and that's his legacy.
Yeah.
Deporting more people combined than all other presidents before him. But he gave Trump the machine, and Trump picked up the keys and ran with it.
Yeah, and it's something I really wish that the media had reported on more during the Obama administration, because maybe if more attention had been drawn to it then this apparatus wouldn't exist. Like, ICE was on their bullshit back then too.
Absolutely.
Like, PD was on their bullshit back then too.
Yeah.
He was doing family separations too, so maybe if we had paid a little more attention back then, or at least listened to the people who were trying to draw attention to this, maybe we wouldn't be here right now.
And nothing gets to me more than these resistance people that just keep talking about all of this being Trump's fault. Like, this is years and years in the making. And I'm not saying it was all Obama, because certainly it's just a building process. I mean, really, it started under Clinton when they really changed everything for the worse. But every year, every president just getting incrementally worse. And now we notice it because Trump sucks. Obviously, everyone knows Trump sucks. That's fine. But and to be fair, obviously enforcement is like we've never seen it, and this discretion is virtually gone from the system. Obama at least had some discretion built into the way that he was doing things, but this stuff has always sucked.
Yeah, and I mean, people, we bitch about ICE rightfully, but like ICE goes back to 9/11. Like that's when ICE was established. We got rid of what was it back then? It was
INS, but so there
we
the equivalent of ICE was a department of INS.
Yeah,
and the mistake was creating a separate agency and then politicizing that agency and saying, suddenly you have a fight about how much immigration enforcement we should have instead of how immigration enforcement should be incorporated into the system. By making them their own rogue agency, we did the worst thing we could have done for it. And now we're, like I said, we're just going to keep ramping up the number of officers on the street, the number of agents out there, and we're not going to talk about de-escalating any of this. It's never going to happen because it's never going to be part of a cohesive whole the way it was with INS. And it was bad with INS too. There's certainly plenty of injustices and terrible things happening, but internal deportation was nowhere near what it is now.
Yeah, and you didn't have the ICE presence, which that's what bothers me, is like this.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you just look at them and it's like, do you really need to look like you're a member of SWAT? Like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah.
It's all just this huge intimidation factor, and it's another one of those that obviously us libertarians, not including you because you're not one of us, and that's okay. But
we have a lot in common.
Yeah, but it's this trying to point out that like what is done to another group of people will be done to you eventually. It may not be today, but it will be you one day.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I look at what is going on with ICE and what is going on with local PD as far as rounding up migrants or immigrants or illegal immigrants or whatever we're supposed to be calling them this week and deporting them. It's like you're setting up this police state that will eventually fuck you too.
Absolutely. The canaries in the coal mine every time. Immigrants are always out front. And one of the many places we do agree is I don't want to see federal law enforcement in my neighborhood. I just don't. And they're going to become a permanent presence pretty soon for a lot of places. And I mean, right now there are 5,000 active ICE agents on the ground in the United States, and Trump wants to make it 15,000. And that's a dramatic increase. You'll start to notice it. Regular U.S. citizens are going to start to see ICE just around. And that should make everybody uncomfortable. That should really make you stop and think.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of just seeing local cops around. I don't really want to see federal agents just like hanging out. Like, no.
Where are these small government conservatives? Like, why are they not stepping up? Where are these people? Do they exist anymore?
No.
I guess not. I don't know.
No.
Because I mean, I've been saying for a while that. What if the IRS started doing this, right? What if the IRS started saying, we want you to hold people just to local police departments, or started showing up in courthouses, or started acting the way ICE is acting to collect back tax bills, right?
Yeah.
I think that most U.S. citizens would really have a problem with that, but nobody cares when it's immigrants.
Yeah, because there are others. You think it's never going to happen to you. It's like, well, you start normalizing certain things, and all of a sudden, it's you.
Yep.
And it's the same way, like, you probably wouldn't be comfortable just having like FBI agents just kind of like hanging out, looking at what you're doing. You'd be like, no, go away. Like, mind your business.
Yeah, it's my street corner. Yep.
Yeah. But I think actually, you know what, before we go, just because you did write an article about it, and I do want to give you a chance to talk about it, the ICE situation in courthouses in Boston, try to kind of explain what kind of nonsense ICE is trying to pull there now.
Well, it's everywhere too. I want to point out that I think in New York it's something up. It's like 1,200 or 1,500% up. But essentially that they're really picking on Massachusetts because our Supreme Judicial Court was one of the first places to say that an ICE detainer is not a warrant, which is pretty obvious if you know what ICE detainers are. You know what warrants are. And so we essentially the SJC made us a sanctuary state by fiat, by a very good case. But ICE literally came out, I think the next day or the day after, and said, great, well, if you don't want to abide by ICE warrants, if you're going to say your state can't honor these, that we're just going to start coming to courthouses and getting you where you are. And there are just all kinds of reasons that that's a problem, obviously, but it's been a real issue for my clients. It's been a real issue for our community here in East Boston and Chelsea and Revere, where I work. Because, again, we have domestic violence victims who are terrified to go get restraining orders. We have people who are witnesses of crimes, people who are victims of crimes, who are concerned rightfully about ICE hanging around. If you have a deportation order and you're a defendant, even in a very minor traffic violation, there's a very good chance, if you're in Chelsea, that there's going to be an ICE agent waiting for you because they know who you are and they're there. And it's just and just watching it happen, as I have now several times, like actually watching a federal agent arrest somebody in a state courthouse, it's really terrible. It's dramatic. Like, it's really, because they're in plain clothes. These people think they're being kidnapped sometimes. There's stories of like family members rushing to try to beat these guys up because they think it's an actual kidnapping. And it is. I mean, it really is an abduction from a state court, which needs to be allowed to be given space to work, right? ICE is not allowed to go to hospitals. They're not allowed to go to schools. We're not allowed to go to churches, right? For obvious reasons, right? We don't want these images of ICE agents busting down a church door. And courthouses have to be treated the same way. You have to give the state courts the ability to do state court stuff. And we all have our problems with what's happening in state courts. And I'm not defending most of what happens in state courts, but I'm saying that there are functions that they serve, like restraining orders, and like many serious crime victims that are looking for justice. And if you believe in federalism, if you believe in limited government, if you believe in keeping federal and state governments separate, it's really horrifying to watch the federal government come in and do what they're doing in courthouses. And like I said, if it was the IRS, if it was the EPA, can you imagine like coming in and arresting people on an EPA warrant because you dumped toxins on the ground or because you had back taxes? People would notice and people would be mad about it. And these immigration violations are even less legally. They're even less significant than IRS or EPA violations. They're not even crimes. They're equivalent of a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. And it's just for so many people, especially the Trump base, I think it's really just they're getting what they want. They're getting the right people are being persecuted. And as long as that's the case, right up until the point like you're talking about when it's us, they don't care. That's where we're at.
All right. Well, I think on that point, we're going to go ahead. This is such a up note to end a podcast on right there. But
I hope it's time for a drink for everybody listening. I hope you're able to be at a time when you can have a drink.
Yes. But yeah, and of course, as always, fuck ICE.
Yeah. All the way.
I think everybody that listens to this can agree with that on one level or another. So this is the point where I tell everybody to plug yourself, plug your stuff, social media, where you tell people about your nonprofit. So go for it.
Sure, I got plenty of stuff, but I'll keep it quick. Golden Stairs Immigration Center is our new nonprofit. It's in East Boston, serving a community that doesn't have any nonprofit legal services right now. So we have a GoFundMe going. We're doing long-term funding. If you know any grants or anything else, you can hook us up with as well. But certainly we welcome the donations. I'm on Twitter at Matt_Cam, and I spend way too much time there, so follow me there. But yeah, it was great talking to you. This is, like I said, I'm not a full-on libertarian, but I don't really like the federal government. I think we have a lot in common, and this is fun.
Yeah, well, thank you for sitting down and talking with me. It was really fun. I think it's really educational. I think hopefully people will have learned something at some point during this. So yeah, just thanks for sitting down with me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
All right.
Have a good one.
You too. So that was my interview with Matt. Like I said at the beginning, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it. And of course, I will put all of Matt's information, both his personal Twitter information and also the information for Golden Stairs Immigration, down in the show notes. So if you want to follow him or follow Golden Stairs and consider making a donation to Golden Stairs, because obviously it's a nonprofit organization and they require donations to run. So anyway, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and, as always, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.